Hello and welcome to the Being Human podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Bottaro, and I want to share with you another Christmas gift. And actually, we decided to start doing a lot of this. We have more gifts for you. If you go to the show notes, we have a link to make sure you're on the email list. We're going to do 12 days of Christmas gifts, 12 days of Christmas starting on Christmas and continuing the 12 days after. And we're going to have a new gift for you every day. But this podcast episode is another gift. I hope you enjoyed last week's. We were talking about the secrets of charity, forgiveness, the incarnation, and that lens of trauma-informed divine mercy. Well, I'm going to give you another gift today to understand a psychological understanding of how to actually become the best version of yourself. We love this phrase. It's an awesome phrase. We hear also St. John Paul II tell us, become who you are. And sometimes we can hear that in a spiritual context only, which of course it has a spiritual dimension to it. But there's a lot of this stuff in the head and in the heart that gets in the way. That's not just spiritual. And we call that psychological. It can also overlap with the biological, the physiological. So we have the body, and then we have the spirit, and then we have the overlap of the two in the psyche. So let's use our understanding of the person's interiority. That's a great word. Also, John Paul II's favorite word, one of his favorites. We're going to look through the lens of interiority to really see how we can become the best version of ourselves. There's some really good nuggets of motivation here. This is like, I'm not usually like a motivational speaker kind of thing. The hoorah, dancing on the stage, Tony Robbins type thing. But there's some really good nuggets in those speakers, in their hearts and in their messages, that if we properly place that in the trajectory of holiness, becoming saints, well, I think we can use all the help we can get. So I hope you appreciate this. Again, if this is a gift that you enjoy, that you do receive something from, please share it with others. Don't hold these gifts for yourselves. That's the beauty of a podcast. It's free. The more you give it away, the more it grows. The more that your own gift can grow in your own understanding, and the more that you can share that with other people and hopefully spread the charity and the motivation to grow in this path of holiness. May God bless you. And may the incarnate Christ become alive in you in a new way this year. I spent the last 10 years learning how to help people using the best techniques available in psychology integrated with the Catholic faith. Now we've figured out that there's a better way to help people than just slapping a Catholic label on the same secular model of therapy you find anywhere else. The real question is, how will we make this shift to a new model of truly Catholic accompaniment, keeping the psychological sciences in mind while opening up to a more human and more effective approach? This podcast is here to give you the answer. Join me and follow along as I take you behind the scenes of what this new model looks like, using recorded audio from sessions working with my team, with colleagues, and even directly with clients. My name is Dr. Greg Bottaro, and I want to welcome you to the Being Human podcast. St. Catherine of Siena said, "If you are what God made you to be, you would set the world on fire." There is a greatness that you are called to. Something deep inside of you probably tells you that that is true. In fact, when we're little, we think about that. We think we have futures of greatness, of excellence, of doing wonderful, great things. When we're little, we dream about becoming astronauts and going into outer space, or inventing some next big thing, or doing all sorts of things that our imaginations run wild with. And unfortunately, what do the adults in our lives tell us? Maybe that's a little too crazy. Maybe we need to tone it down a little bit. The world wants to beat that greatness out of us, and it ends up lying to us. We get these messages from school, from college, from going out into the world, into the workplace. People want to tell us, try to be more realistic about what you can do in this world. And it's really a load of garbage. Because the truth is, you're made for something greater than what you can imagine. Imagine that. It's not that you're wishing too much. It's not that you're dreaming too big. It's that you're not dreaming big enough. That's the truth of who you're created to be, and that's what's actually possible for you. And in fact, that's what the world needs. The world needs that from you. It's not just about your own happiness. It's true. That's the only way you're going to be happy, is if you fulfill that plan that's laid out before you, that you're made for. But it's not just about your own happiness. It's the world that needs it from you. It's kind of the irony. The world is beating it out of you, but the world needs it from you at the same time. Our families need it from us. Your friends, your family, the people whom you love need you to show up, to be the best version of yourself. And there's only one way. It's if you believe in yourself and in the greatness that you're called to. We have lots of experiences in life that teach us about who we are and what life is all about. And a lot of those experiences are not good. They're not pleasant. They're not comfortable. Many of those experiences are mistakes, errors. They're lessons learned from things that we get wrong the first time around. And our tendency is to avoid that kind of suffering or discomfort. We want to protect ourselves. We want to play it safe. So we end up developing a distrust in our own path and journey. We orient ourselves looking for people who did it right, who do it perfectly. In our minds, in our imagination, we find people who never make a mistake. And we think that if we model these ways of perfection, that somehow we're going to avoid making mistakes that will hurt. But we couldn't be further from the truth when we do that. First of all, nobody is without their own mistakes. So even those people that we look at and think that they've got all the answers, they have a perfect life, they've been perfectly successful, there's a backstory with a lot of pain and suffering and a lot of lessons learned, if they're even models worth looking up to. And the fact is, the lessons that you learn in your life are what are helping you to become the best version of yourself. You are making mistakes and what they say, failing forward. You know, we have to fail fast and fail forward. That's when we have a mentality of growth. That's when we believe in ourselves. So we start with that belief in ourselves and the greatness that we're called to. And then we get to it. We get to work and we begin or we continue on this path towards that greatness, which means that we're going to trip and fall. We're going to stumble. We're going to get knocked off our trail for a little bit and get derailed. But we have to pick ourselves back up, believing always in that vision of greatness. As we progress through life, and as we build this repertoire of experience and wisdom, what we're doing is maturing our inner voice. You see, we all have this inner voice, this conscience. You know, we have like Jiminy Cricket riding around on our shoulder. This conscience does not start off very wise. When we're children, when we're teenagers especially, we realize that inner voice has some growing up to do. But as we make these mistakes in life, as we suffer some discomfort or pain along the way, as we suffer tragedy, as we suffer even death or loss, and we have to mourn and grieve some things that happen in our lives, that inner voice is matured and our conscience becomes well adapted to truth. And so we're constantly moving closer and closer towards our own truth, towards the truth of the world and the universe around us. And more we line up with that sense of truth and goodness and beauty in the world. And so we move towards this goodness by following that inner compass. So it's kind of like a both and paradox. What I mean by that is we have to trust ourselves, starting with where we are, and also believing that it's growing and maturing and developing in terms of the direction that it's leading us to. It's not either or, am I right or am I wrong? It's both. You are right to trust yourself and look inside, and you're right to imagine that you're growing and maturing along the way. There is no other way to actually get to greatness. You'll never reach greatness simply by mirroring and copying somebody else's plan, somebody else's path. There's a path made just for you, and there's only one way to walk that path and get to the destiny of greatness you're created for, and that's by following your own inner compass. But that means that we have to get used to falling and picking ourselves up and beginning again. That's the only way. That's what's going to happen as you progress. So you get used to it, you get comfortable with it, and you come to expect it and not really get too distracted when it happens. But pick yourself up and keep walking forward. As we are growing and learning through life and developing this wisdom and maturity and building this repertoire of experience, we are affecting our unconscious minds. And our unconscious minds are these really amazing memory banks, these storehouses of building that experience, which then can influence and affect the way that we think and make decisions and run in our normal daily life. You see, in our daily conscious mind, we can only hold so much data at once. One way to think about it is as working memory. It's the mind that we need, the bandwidth that's available to just carry through and do simple tasks. But we only have a limited amount of mind space available for doing those simple tasks on a daily basis. And especially since we encounter so many new things in our day, we have to have some of that bandwidth open. So the brain, organizing itself really well, will file into the unconscious as much as it possibly can, as soon as it gets a hold on something. And it realizes that, well, this is always going to be the same thing, so let's put it back into the unconscious. We don't need to keep it on the forefront of working memory. So for instance, when you're first learning how to walk, imagine a little toddler starting to learn how to walk, and it's one foot in front of the other, in front of the other. That experience has not yet been put into the unconscious mind. And so you could see they're like paying attention to every little step, and everything is really wobbly and they're all over the place. And it looks really awkward until finally, step after step, day after day, that muscle memory, that experience of movement, the balance, all of those different elements come together and they get filed deeper down into the unconscious so that they're remembering how to walk, but without having to think about it. Well, we do that in all aspects of our life, not just in the physical things we need to learn how to do with our bodies. And another way to think about it is with relationships. So when we are first navigating relationships, we're very awkward. We don't know what to make of the looks people give us or the tone in people's voices. But over time, same thing, just like walking, we start to file things away into our unconscious minds. In doing so, we develop stories around certain looks, certain tones, certain interactions. And the stories are going to inform us to not have to use working memory as much moving forward. So in other words, if I come home from a long day of work and I open the door and I see my wife and I see the look on her face, whatever that look is, I probably have some story filed away for what she's thinking and feeling. It's my way of shortcutting, having to figure it out every single time I see her for the first time. So if she has a sour look on her face, or some kind of negative look on her face, or some grimace as I walk through the door, I could take that very personally. If I tell myself the story, my wife's not happy to see me. My wife's upset with me. What did I do now? What did I do this time? What did I forget? Uh-oh, is it our anniversary? Do we have a date I forgot about? Is there something I did wrong? Now, what could have actually happened? She just stepped on a Lego 2 seconds before I walked in the door. Maybe that's what gave the face, that gave reason to the look on her face. It could be a million different things. But the point is, I'm going to quickly come up with a story based on my experience that I've filed away. So the first thing we need to do even though we trust ourselves and we're going to look for our own internal compass to point us on the direction of finding our own path and our own greatness, we have to also be aware of the fact that that compass is influenced by the stories that we tell ourselves. So, do you have a story about failure? Do you have a story about making a mistake? Do you have a story about not getting it right the first time? Do you have a story about some imperfection? So maybe you've done really well at something, but not as well as it could have been. What stories have been taught to you through other people's responses to you in your life? Those are the kind of questions that will get us thinking about what those stories are. It's really just enough to start with to be aware that there are stories. Most of us walk around blind and asleep to the stories that we're actually telling ourselves on a moment-to-moment basis in our life. The first thing we need to do is just wake up to this reality that there is an unconscious mind. It is actually informed by our experience, and that based on that experience, there are these stories that keep coming up and informing our conscious minds of how to think about our current experience. And there's a filter or a bias that we're adding to reality by doing so. Just becoming aware of that fact is going to help you tremendously in getting to uncover the truth about a situation. So I walk in the door, I see the look on my wife's face. Instead of reacting immediately as if she's unhappy to see me, I might pause for a moment, leave a space open a little bit so that I might find out what's really going on. Now, maybe there's some reason that she really is unhappy to see me. I don't know. But if I leave that space open for enough time to find out, I'm going to save myself a lot of trouble that I otherwise would have by jumping to conclusions. And then I find out, oh, you just stepped on a Lego, or maybe something happened at home. Or maybe I did forget about something that I need to now make up for. Either way, we're going to get closer to truth by recognizing the way that those stories are actually blocking us from it. As you start to become more aware of the stories that you're telling yourself that are arising, coming up from that unconscious mind, that storehouse of memory from all of your previous experiences in life, good and bad, you're going to be more free to make better decisions for yourself in your life. So think again about that example I gave, coming home from work and seeing the look on my wife's face. Now, if I immediately jump to a conclusion because of the story that I've built around a look on her face, and she actually didn't have that negative feeling towards me, well, I'm kind of enslaved to that story that my mind has told me that's coming up. And I've created a situation now that maybe didn't need to be there based on my own slavery to that unconscious story. So if I react negatively because I anticipate something negative from my wife, now I've created a tension in that moment. It didn't need to be there. Our greatest dignity as human beings comes from the freedom we have to think clearly and make good choices. Let me repeat that because it's really important. Our greatest dignity that we have as human beings comes from the freedom we have to think clearly and make good decisions. So this is what we're unpacking here in this section, is thinking clearly. What that means is becoming aware of the different elements that enter into our conscious mind so that whatever we're thinking, whatever we think we see or know, the stories that we're telling ourselves, we're aware of where they might be coming from and how they might be affecting what we're interpreting in that moment. So again, as we become more aware, we become freer. And that freedom is our dignity. That's what makes us great. We can think about these things. So I get to step in the house, see the look on my wife's face, and then think about the fact that I do have this story, but I can also pause and I can get some more of the truth here. And I can get a better picture of what's really going on. And by entering in with that space and having that clarity of thought, now I'm free to have a real conversation based on something else that otherwise I would have missed. This is our greatest dignity. This is our greatest freedom. And so as we progress through life, and again, we make mistakes sometimes, we are imperfect, sometimes we have to pick ourselves up and pivot and make a different decision, we're building a sense of experience and wisdom, which is going to help us make better and better choices as we go along. So there might have been time that I made the mistake of jumping to conclusion based on the way my wife was looking at me when I came in the house. And based on that experience, if I think about it clearly, the next time around I might pause a little bit more. I might be quicker to realize that there's a story I'm telling myself, and I don't need to necessarily jump to conclusions. That's a little bit more experience that's getting built into my repertoire. That's going to help me become more awake, more alive to the greatness of my own dignity and the freedom that I have to think clearly and make good decisions. Creating space is really what it all comes down to. The space that we can create in each present moment is going to be the space that reveals our greatest dignity and power and freedom. And that's how we're going to intentionally be able to forge our way, to find our path, and to become the best versions of ourselves that we've been created to become. That space is what we can intentionally create by tapping into this awareness of the stories that we tell ourselves. Otherwise, we're really living by instinct, and that's much like the animals. And we do have a kind of animal instinct, but we confuse animal instinct with our inclinations to act certain ways based on these stories. You see, there's a difference. Animal instinct is something that we're just born with. We want to flinch away from, a cliff, or, we want to pull our hand away from something that's hot. Maybe we learn it very quickly, but usually these things are built in. Those are more properly termed instincts. But there are other things that we develop over time that we sometimes loosely call instinct. They're not really instinct. They're stories that we've taught ourselves or we've learned by the experiences we've had in our life. Sometimes those are really good and helpful narratives that will help us make good choices, but sometimes they're not. And the way we know the difference is by creating a space. When we create that space, we can ask the question, where is this story coming from? Does this story help me in this particular circumstance? Have I ever experienced anything like this before where a story I've built before might be helpful? Or maybe this is something entirely new. So I have to be open to a new kind of experience here and actually look to be more intentional. This is how we can show up. This is how we can be present in the world in a way that no other created being can. The animals don't get to show up like this. They're only acting purely on instinct. We are better than the animals. We have so much more capacity for greatness than they do. That's how we enter into it. We open up that space. We discover what we're capable of by thinking clearly, by evaluating, and by taking in more of what's really happening in this moment. And then we discover that within ourselves, we have this capacity to see truth beyond what we were maybe assuming was possible before. But we have to open up that space to let truth in, to let the moment in, so that we're really present to what's going on. Now that I've given you a little taste of what is actually happening inside of your own mind, think about what happens when you start interacting with people all around you. We are never really fully present to each other, all together, all at once, 100%. We are constantly involved in the embattled storytelling from one mind to the next. Everybody's got an unconscious. Everybody's got a history and a repertoire of experience and a memory bank filled with all the good and bad and painful things that have happened. And so all of those stories that come together are competing with each other. You might think that it's supposed to be one way based on your story. Somebody else thinks it's supposed to be a different way based on their story. The Going back to the look on my wife's face when I come in the house, she has a story about what my look is supposed to be when I see her in pain. You see, in that moment, if she stepped on a Lego, she's expecting me to feel compassion or sympathy for her. She has no idea what's going on in my mind as I come in through the door. And so if she's basing her perspective on her story and then her emotional reaction is tied to that without any conscious thought, how do you think she's going to react? Probably pretty negatively. So you can see here when we talk about the stories that we tell ourselves, everybody's telling themselves a story. This becomes really, really tricky to navigate because not only are you called to be aware of your own stories, but you're also called to be aware that everybody around you has their own story. The best people in this world who have excelled at becoming who God created them to be are able to manage these two realities. They're able to, on one hand, be aware of and look out for and anticipate the stories that they've learned to tell themselves, and also be compassionate and patient and kind and understanding that the other person or the other people also have stories that they're telling themselves. Again, the first step here is simply awareness. Waking up to this reality that we have stories, that they have stories, that you have stories, that everybody's got a story. And if we're not careful and we just operate sleeping through our life and not waking up to this reality, it's just going to be a battle of stories. We can do better than that. We can wake up to our own and we can wake up to each other. Ultimately, this is how we discover our path, and this is how we show up in the world, giving the world exactly what it needs from us. We become the best versions of ourselves when we are open to the way that we are operating in this life. Life is a journey. It's not just a silly cliche. And what that means, it's progressive. We learn from our mistakes. We become better. We develop along the way. And it's because of our mistakes that we build and we grow and we mature. If we didn't make mistakes, we would never learn. And we couldn't just simply be magically, immediately created into some perfect version of what we're supposed to be. So whether it's in business or in family or in spirituality or in a hobby like playing baseball or going fishing or whatever it is, you're going to start off at the beginning. You're going to keep working at it, making mistakes, growing along the way, and learning from those mistakes and becoming better at what you do. But this is precisely how we can engage more intentionally with that process, by being aware of what's happening up here and how things are getting filed away, how that unconscious mind is driving a lot of the ways we think and feel and act. And so the more that we're aware that there's a story that we're telling ourselves, that it's being formed by our experience and then it's informing our perception, the more we open up to seeing whether or not that's serving us in the next decision moving forward. And then we open up to a beautiful reality that we are here in this journey, that we are showing up, that we are giving the world exactly what we can and what they need from us, our families, our loved ones, and even ourselves. And that is how to find the deepest fulfillment and satisfaction in this world. Thanks for listening to the Being Human podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode and want to help us spread the word and hear more, please head over to iTunes, leave us a review, and subscribe, as it really helps us to get our content out to more people. Be sure to listen next time as I take you deeper into what it means to be human. If you want more free content and information about what we do at the Catholic Psych Institute, head on over to CatholicPsych.com. God bless you.